Thank you very much, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, it concerns me greatly that in this contribution that we've just heard and in the contribution from the Minister, both of those speakers seem to be unable to differentiate between a fee for service that is a service available to all those who who pay the fee and a bribe. And those are very different issues. It's a fairly clear distinction that I think anyone can understand, and it concerns me greatly that they are unable to distinguish between them. And I think it's very important that culture is taken into account, and one of the cultures that we are trying to inculcate through the passage of this bill is one that is against corruption. And I want to talk particularly about clause 105F, which is the trading in influence. But before I do that, I want to go back right to the beginning of this section of the bill, which is clause 4, which defines what is meant by crimes involving dishonesty. And when we turn to the actual bill itself, or the actual act itself, the one that is being amended, it makes a clear reference to ministers of the Crown and members of Parliament. And the reason that I raise this is because I want to bring into context the issue of what is a small payment versus what is a large payment. And I want to use a very quick anecdote by way of that. I have regularly dined in establishments in my electorate and through the Wellington region where I have gone to leave, the proprietors of that establishment have tried to prevent me from paying for my meal. And then, in many other instances, I've been approached by those very same proprietors seeking assistance with a matter. Normally immigration, but there have been others as well. I can say to the House that I have always insisted on paying for every one of those meals that I've eaten. And that's not significant amounts of money, because we're not talking about fine dining establishments here. But I have always paid for the meal concerned, because I have a standard that says that any payment could be deemed to influence me in the way that I act, and therefore I have made that distinction, because that is a value that I hold dear. And that is the culture, that is the value that we need to be instilling through these kinds of legislation. So when we get the government saying that there's a difference between a small payment and a large payment, well, how small is small? Is one of those meals, for example, a small payment? I mean, we're talking about a small amount of money. It's not a very expensive meal. But, you know, and I'm covered by this. We are all covered by this law. We are all deemed to be covered by the law that we are passing now, and quite rightly so. So this impacts on all of us. Does going out and accepting a free meal from someone who you then offer assistance to, you know, whether it be on immigration or whatever else, and it's a small payment, is that a bribe? That's a question for the government members. And I think it's a legitimate one for the government to answer, because if they would say that, and I would say yes it is, and if they would say yes it is too, then how is that different to a small facilitation payment as they have defined it in the debate that we've had on this bill so far? And I think that that's something that we have yet to hear from the government on. But coming to clause 105F, which is the trading of influence, the point that I want to make here, because this clause only deals with the influence of officials. But actually, there are people other than officials who have significant influence on decision-making processes. And by limiting this to only officials, we potentially narrow down the scope of the intent of this legislation. And so what I would like to know from the Minister and the Chair is whether the wording of this, and particularly on the third line here, a bribe for that person or another person with the intent to influence an official. Now, or another person. The reason, what I'd like is some more definition from the Minister on what's meant by or another person. Because does that mean that somebody who is basically paying a bribe to someone who they think will have influence over a decision-making process who isn't an official, is that wording designed to cover those people? Because it's not always a direct payment or a direct bribe to an official. There are other people who have influence on officials as well. And I want to be sure that that 105F, trading and influence, covers those people. Because if it doesn't, then in fact, you know, there's a real argument to be made that this bill will not achieve its stated objectives of ensuring that, you know, bribery, outright bribery, is illegal. Because if a payment can be made to somebody else who can then exert influence, then in fact, you know, I think that many of the other provisions in this bill are therefore redundant. So the final point that I want to make, Mr. Chair, in this brief contribution on this debate, which is the one that I opened with, is culture matters. the point of this exercise, the major thing that we have to be stressing as parliamentarians is that we have a zero tolerance culture when it comes to bribery and corruption. And I'm not sure that the messages coming from the government members speaking on this legislation are contributing to that.
Mr. Chair.